Job. Over the course of this year, we have been doing a series at various points in time on a topic that responds to the reality of conflict within our lives. I mean, even just chatting to people this morning, kind of catching up on what their week has looked like. It doesn't take long in the midst of the many celebrations to also find pain. And some of that pain is systemic pain. I'm affected by this organization or this structure that is not delivering what they promised. Sometimes it's relational pain. This person did this thing to me, either this week or in the past, and I'm still trying to navigate how I respond to that. You know, like the Christian experience, sometimes it's unfortunate that sometimes faith is paraded as obviously a solution to everything. And with that comes this necessity of just joy at all times, but we know that that's not an accurate picture of what it looks like to live in a broken world. In fact, as followers of Jesus, like everybody in the world, we're trying to navigate the pain and the joy and what it means to live in relationship, especially with other people. And that's why over the course of this year, we've continued to dive into this series called Pursuing Peace, because we want to get really, really good as followers of Jesus at seeking the path of peace, even in the midst of pain and in the midst of chaos. And so today is going to be really practical. We're going to be looking at Colossians chapter 3, and we're going to be looking at what it means to actually forgive. I mean, this whole series has been about conflict. And so I suppose if you haven't been here for the other weeks, I just want to do a little recap, because it can be really helpful to do a little recap. There's the other sermons are online if you want to go back and be like, I want to hear a bit more about that detail. But every conflict arises when there is a gap between expectation and experience. And I know that that sounds really clinical, but actually when we think about the conflict that exists in our life, that is true. And it's not to say that those expectations are unreasonable, just to be clear. But whatever those expectations are, when we don't experience in that, that is when conflict arises. Sometimes there's conflict that we don't even know that we have with other people because we don't know what their experiences are. And yet that is where conflict arises from. And we all know that there are different responses to those conflicts. Sometimes there's these traps of attack. I'm just going to attack this person verbally or, by diminishing their name or kind of this active or passive revenge. And then sometimes an alternate response is just to escape, which sometimes is just as unhelpful. And yet the conflict remains. And so this series has been an opportunity to, I suppose, re-examine conflict, something that sometimes people are hesitant to even engage with, and consider for a moment that maybe conflict actually creates an opportunity. And this is in no way to diminish the significance of the pain, okay? I want to make that really, really clear. But nevertheless, conflict provides an opportunity for those who trust Jesus to glorify God, to serve others, and to grow to be like Christ. And so each of these sermons has explored a biblical text that looks at this countercultural way to respond to conflict, to avoid these traps of attack and escape, and actually seek to restore relationship while doing these things. And you might look at these things and be like, man, that's a hard pill to swallow. And indeed it is. And yet at the same time, forgiveness is one of those characteristics that as followers of Jesus, we are called to be excellent at. It is our mandate. And so we also need to learn how to do it well. Back in Matthew chapter 18, and there's many, many passages on forgiveness, we see this interaction between Peter and Jesus. It says in verse 21, then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? And Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Now, we've spoken about this passage in the past. Jesus, by saying 77, doesn't say get a longer notebook. He's saying the act of forgiveness is not something that is just about kind of ticking a box. It's something you're going to have to do over and over and over again. That's what it means to follow me. And it's interesting that in our kind of day and age, this idea of forgiving one another, as much as it is difficult, is something that we somewhat understand. Back in Jesus' day and in the Hebrew tradition, the idea of kind of forgiving your neighbor was actually quite revolutionary. It was around, but the basic understanding was that God is the one who forgives, not we forgive each other. And so these questions around like how many times, how do we work this? Why did you add that bit about forgiveness into the Lord's Prayer, Jesus? These kind of questions were very real for the time. And the reality is when we talk about forgiveness, and even that idea of 77 times, and maybe how you've applied that, this word is going to be loaded for many people sitting here today or joining us online. Because often we are at all kinds of places and understandings when it comes to the practice of forgiveness. And yet forgiveness, while central to our practice of faith and trust in Jesus, it can actually be really, really misunderstood. And so while I've done this list before, for those who have been here, I want to go through the list again of what forgiveness is not. I just want to make this really, really clear. What forgiveness is not, first of all. So forgiveness is not condoning. This is really important. It's not condoning. Some people think that when they forgive somebody, they're essentially saying it's okay to do this, right? Or it's acting like what they did was not significant, right? But these are two different things. To forgive or to set someone free in the depths of your heart is to live free from bitterness, okay? And it is a different issue to condoning their action. Forgiveness, this is a big one, is not forgetting. This is really, really important. That statement we often hear, you forgive and forget, not helpful. Not helpful. Because some people are going to hurt us again and again and again, and some people are destructive and toxic, and sometimes it is necessary to set up really firm boundaries so that we won't be hurt again. We may forgive them, but as part of that process, we may not be able to be around them. Forgiving is not forgetting. Part of it is remembering. Forgiveness is not always reconciling, because reconciling requires two people. And often, this is simply not going to be possible to have both people come and reconcile. We should forgive people and we should strive to reconcile, but it's not always the case or ever even possible. Forgiveness does not mean that everything will go back to how it once was before. Sometimes you have been hurt by somebody and they have passed away. You can't get the two of you in the same room again. And you've got to work out, what am I going to do with that? Am I going to allow that bitterness to continue to fester? Is it even possible to forgive in this situation? Jesus would say yes, because forgiveness is not always reconciling. Forgiveness is a different issue to justice and consequences. It's okay to call the police if someone breaks into your house. If they steal your car, you don't need to say, here, take my iPad too. All right? It's a different issue, okay? If they did something, and sometimes there are legal consequences for that, that is a different issue to you forgiving them. I just want to make that really, really clear. Forgiving is not impersonal. You forgive people. It's really, really hard to forgive institutions. And I've spoken about this before. What was the person's name? Who was the person who hurt you? It's very hard to forgive a business because hurt is personal. Somebody wronged you, they perceive that they wronged you, and some people are kind of stuck because they're unable to forgive because there's this kind of faceless institution that they're trying to forgive and they haven't got back to the core of actually forgiveness is personal. And the last thing is forgiveness is not always immediate. It's often a process. And I know this. So people can carry resentment for years. And then sometimes, you have a conversation with someone and they're just like, oh, you just got to forgive them. As if like that's an easy thing to do, and it's just not. Some wrongs that have been done to us have shaped and labeled us in different ways. And so forgiveness is this profound understanding that maybe what has been done to me, in what has been done to me, I have become in some way someone that I am not. And often I need to, often quite slowly, actually unlearn a bunch of behaviors, unlearn a bunch of labels. It's a process. Because at the end of the day, forgiveness, here's your definition, is the choice to break the cycle of revenge or payback. That's what forgiveness is. And I realize I'm going through this quickly, but this is because this is just the recap. If you want to dive a bit more into this, then we've got 3 or 4 other sermons in this series. But it's very important as we head into this idea of forgiveness. If I just come up here and I'm just like, hey guys, just forgive Just forgive, right? You just be like, Gavin, seriously, but you don't know what they did to me. Or it's not that easy because of I bought into something on that list, right? So that's why we're doing this. But that's what forgiveness is. It's saying, I'm going to break the cycle of revenge and payback. That's what I'm doing when I'm forgiving. I'm going to entrust perfect justice to God. Doesn't mean there won't be human justice, but we all know that human justice is limited, right? But I'm going to entrust perfect justice to God, and in the process, I'm going to set myself free. I'm going to set myself free from what this person did to me. That is what forgiveness is. It's saying, I will not allow what this person did to me to control me or my response toward them any longer. That's what we do when we forgive, and it takes time. Because in some ways, when we don't forgive, we are like bound, and I've illustrated before by being bound to a chair in this sense of going like, I am trapped by what they have done to me, and yet I am the one who holds the key to my own release. But it takes time, and it's hard. And this is what I want to focus on tonight, or today, should I say. Forgiveness is really hard. So where do we start? Because it can feel so unfair to forgive. Again, Gavin, you don't know what they did to me. You don't know what they're continuing to do to me. You don't know the state of their heart. They're not repentant at all. They don't even know. They're not even willing to engage, And yet, all of these things are indicative of the fact that my response, whether to try and escape it or whether to respond with aggression, is ultimately tethered to what they have done to me. I remember chatting, it was a few months ago now, actually quite a few months ago, following the Kumanjai White situation that happened here in town. And it would have been about 3 weeks afterwards, and I was sitting down after a church service with Andrea and with Jeanette, two amazing women from Yunamu and from Lajamanu, amazing Christian women, and they were talking about the pain and the angst and the hurt that occurred as a result of what took place. And they were sitting here and we're having a conversation about how to respond as family and what their role is going to be. And I remember Jeanette just saying, we just got to keep on forgiving. We just got to keep on forgiving. It doesn't mean that there doesn't need to be consequence. It doesn't mean that it was right. It doesn't mean that I condone it. It doesn't mean, but that's what our response has to be, because what is the alternative? Well, it's anger. It's bitterness. And so it's not uncommon for people to come into my office, and you might have these experiences yourself as you're chatting with other people, that they've experienced pain at the hands of another person, and no surprise, at some point we're going to end up talking about forgiveness. It's going to end up there. And for some people, the forgiveness and the concept of forgiveness is a revelation. That's where I need to get to in order to be free from this. But for other people, they're like, Gavin, I know exactly what you're going to say. You're going to talk about forgiveness. And we can talk about it for an hour, but ultimately I know that's where we're going to get to. I know that as a Christian, that's what I need to do, but it's just too hard. I don't even know where to start. It's a step too far. And this is what I want to focus on today. What does it look like to prepare ourselves to forgive? Because the idea of forgiveness is I want that, but it just feels like a bridge too far. But what can I do to actually prepare myself to forgive? What does it look like not to slow the process down because I don't want to kind of deal with the issue, but to actually make it palatable for me? What do I need to do in order to position myself so that I can forgive? And maybe then forgive again. And then maybe forgive again. 77, 7 times 7, the Jesus way kind of forgive. And what's great about this Colossians 3 passage is that Paul, in writing to the church in Colossae, gives this great illustration as to what it looks like to prepare ourselves to forgive, to actually say, well, if forgiveness is a step too far, I'm not just going to remain here, I'm going to do something to at least move forward to that point. In Colossians 3:12-14, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, so that's us, clothe yourselves with compassion and kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. And so Paul, when he's writing this letter to the church in Colossae, he's actually responding to hostility that is occurring between Jews and Gentiles. Like they're trying to work out what it looks like to be the church. And guess what? If it's like any church, including our church, not everyone always gets along. There's a bit of conflict. But that conflict can't stay where it is. Because as people who are holy and dearly loved, as chosen, we have a different responsibility. And we can see right here in the middle there, this beautiful line, verse 13, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, imitate the Lord. And so we have in here, and this might be your takeaway, this could simply be your takeaway from this text, you have Paul writing this distinction between bearing with one another and forgiving one another. You know, bearing with one another, sometimes there are things that we just need to overlook. I'm like, this person has hurt me, but I'm making too big a deal of this. I just need to overlook this. I'm just going to bear that. That's all right. But there are other things where we have really been hurt. Maybe we've been labeled and shaped and it's altered our trajectory. And so he includes this phrase, forgive one another. And we need to be released from that inclination towards revenge and payback. And so with that in mind, he does this incredible illustration throughout this text, and actually extends it beyond this text as well. But he employs this image of putting on and taking off layers of clothing. This is what the image that Paul employs. He's like, if you want to understand what this looks like, I want you to capture the metaphor of putting on and taking off layers of clothing. And in this case here, he does this kind of layers referring to these virtues there in verse 12. Because the truth is, whether or not we feel like we are ready to forgive someone, each day we do have a choice as to what to wear. Like, we do have a choice each day as to what we put on. And that is what Paul is wanting to highlight. It was probably in the middle of the year. Meeks and the boys head down to Melbourne a little bit earlier than myself. I had an additional week up here just to finish some work and all that jazz. And I decided, because I lived in Alice Springs for 8.5 years now, I was like, I should probably do a section of the Larapinta Trail. It's like literally my backyard. It feels kind of weird that I haven't done a section yet. And so I thought, all right, I'm going to do this. I've just decided I'm going to do this. And I was chatting around to people and they're like, oh, do section 5. That's a beautiful section. I'm like, sounds great. It's, whatever, 19 k's round trip, by the time you kind of, tap on the return to the car. And I must admit, I didn't have a really high bar. I pretty much just didn't want to die. I kind of felt like I was like Megan would be really annoyed if I died doing this. There would be, but I was like, I think I'm capable of doing this, but I'm not just going to go there naive. I want to be prepared, right? Because this is a big effort for me. It is new territory. It seems a little intimidating. I don't really know what it looks like except for a little squiggle line, and I'm like, I want to be prepared. And so I went through this process of making sure I had to make sure I put on the right clothing, right, for the conditions. I had to choose particular things in order to actually overcome that obstacle. And when I think about forgiveness, it's exactly the same thing. Like, who are we to think that when forgiveness is so hard and maybe even so unfamiliar that we ought not prepare ourselves for this, as if we're just ready to go? It doesn't usually work like that. There is some preparation that we need to do. And so I want to look at these characteristics here. As God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. How do these characteristics, how do these virtues, when we put them on, actually help prepare us to forgive? So let's talk about this. Because for some of us, there is going to be a layer of clothing that maybe we have struggled to put on. And maybe it is that layer of clothing is the layer that we need in order to take a step forward in the forgiveness that is ultimately there in order to free us. So let's talk about compassion. Originally I was going to put these on, but man, it's getting hot. So I'm just going to hold them. Compassion. How does compassion prepare us for forgiveness? You see, compassion is, I suppose, described as a deep sympathy for the suffering and the misfortune of others. That's what compassion is. I have a deep sympathy for the suffering and the misfortune of others. And so why does this help us forgive? Because when we clothe ourselves in this way, when we're willing to place ourselves in a position where we not only understand our own suffering, but the suffering of others, it actually helps grant us perspective. And this isn't to say that what was done to us was insignificant, not at all. But suddenly we realize that others are hurting too. It takes the edge off that potential for selfishness. And we kind of put that on and saying, rather than just looking at my own pain, I'm actually going to have eyes to look at the pain of others today. And allow the pain of others and sitting with them in that space, lamenting with them, to soften my heart to the fact that I am not the only one who has been wronged here. I wonder if putting on a layer of compassion is the thing that you might need in order to overcome the obstacle where you have felt like you have been hurt by someone and maybe you feel like you are simply alone as a result. Paul says, put on compassion. Kindness. Kindness. How does clothing ourselves with kindness contribute to preparing ourselves to forgive others? You see, kindness is an interesting one because the last thing we want to do to the person who has wronged us is be kind. Like, seriously, that comes at a cost. Oh, man. And yet, at the same time, we get this really fascinating passage in Romans that I think kind of speaks to this a little bit. Now, we've got to be careful with this text because it's one of those texts where you kind of pick and choose the bits that you like, and yet it's all in there. In Romans 12, I'm starting with 14 just to give some context, and then 19 to 20, Paul writes, bless those who persecute you. Don't curse them. Pray that God will bless them. Oh, gosh. I remember one person saying that you haven't truly forgiven a person until you are ready to bless them. Oh, that's hard. Verse 19, dear friends, never take revenge. You can hear the forgiveness language coming through here. Never take payback. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. It's like God is the one who is in the right. God is the one who has the perspective, the true perspective. But the scriptures say, I will take revenge. I will pay them back, says the Lord. Don't you do it. Instead, verse 20, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals of shame on their heads. Now, this is where people get caught up here. They're like, sweet, I can do something kind so that they will get hurt. No, like legit, like this is what people do with this passage. They're like, it's like, I'm not actually being kind, and I know I'm not actually being kind, but I'll be kind because then they'll get the coals. And it's like, no, that's not what's going on here. It's framed up with this idea of like, God is the one who brings about the justice. It's not us. Our responsibility is kindness. And with that kindness comes, we trust, conviction. You know, when Jesus said to turn the other cheek, like he was being serious because that was a sense of like there was a shame in turning the other cheek. It's like, if you're willing to hit me again, seriously, what's that doing to your own heart? And so by responding not with hostility but with kindness, what it does actually in our hearts is in a mysterious kind of way, it hands over the responsibility for justice to God. It takes it out of our own hands. That's what it's talking about here in Romans. I'm actually releasing the desire for justice to God. And I'm just going to be kind, even though it hurts. Maybe when it comes to that forgiveness that you need to extend to that person who hurt you this week or has hurt you in the past, your response and the thing you've struggled to put on each day is this: how can I be kind to them? Oh, through gritted teeth. But that's what you need. Humility. There you go, I've got a dress here. You can let me borrow it. Humility. Now, humility is an interesting one. Where does humility fit into our desire to forgive? How does clothing ourselves with humility prepare us to forgive people who would otherwise be very difficult to forgive? See, humility is an interesting one because humility is about taking ownership of those unmet needs. So going back to that question of, where there is a gap between expectation and experience, right? That expectation, like I said, it may be reasonable or it may not be reasonable, and we need to navigate that. But nevertheless, that expectation is something that we need to own. Here in James chapter 4, he identifies, he says, what is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. Now, this doesn't mean that what somebody did to you was okay or justified, but actually one of the first stages of navigating through conflict and actually pursuing that place of forgiveness is to recognize that I didn't get what I wanted. And maybe you were entitled to the thing that you wanted, but nevertheless the conflict arose because you didn't get what you wanted. I wanted loyalty and this person cheated on me. I wanted something, and it's okay to want that, but you still had a need, right? I wanted to be honored, and yet they spoke badly about me. I wanted them to deliver this particular resource, this particular project on this particular timeline, and they failed to do so. It doesn't mean that they're off the hook, but at the same time, we take a little bit of ownership of that conflict and we say, okay, I just want to check that my expectation was reasonable. I just want to check. It's important to do that little self-check. Because if I'm wanting the project done by Friday, that would usually take 6 weeks, I just need to check my heart. Is my conflict legitimate? And so that's where humility comes in. I just need to make sure I include myself in this navigating. What was it that I wanted that I didn't get? And was that reasonable? Gentleness. They look good, don't they? What is gentleness but power under control? That's what gentleness is. Power under control. And when you're in a position where it is tempting to extend either active or passive revenge, and you have the power to do so, gentleness, the decision to maintain control over that inclination is going to be critical. Because if forgiveness takes time, and it often does, you're going to be tempted again and again and again to extend revenge. And yet Jesus says, forgive again and again and again. Sometimes we struggle to forgive, or even it feels like a step too far because simply it's that desire for revenge is just burning too hot. And you've got to put on gentleness. I'm going to control the power that I have, the influence that I have. And lastly, patience. The willingness to endure waiting. That's what patience is. A willingness to endure waiting, delays, or provocation without becoming annoyed or upset. And if you're anything like me, it's got to be hard work. And yet it's a choice to put it on. Today I'm going to be entering into an environment, I'm going to be entering into a space with a person who has hurt me. That hurt is still real. I want to forgive them. It feels like a step too far. What do I need to put on today to prepare myself to forgive? Because forgiveness takes time. And all of these things, they contribute to this journey that we're all commanded as followers of Jesus to take, to forgive and then to forgive again. And so my question is this: is there a layer that you are missing that is becoming a barrier to your own freedom from pain and hurt? Is there a layer you are failing to put on that in not putting it on is acting as a barrier in order to forgive and be free? I love how Paul brackets this command to bear with each other and forgive one another with the virtues above and that last piece of clothing below. And over all of these virtues, you're all stacked up with all these layers, then you're going to put on love. Because this is going to bind everything together in perfect unity. For what did Jesus say? But to love our enemy, love our adversary, love the one who hurt us, and pray for them. So you might be sitting here, you might be sitting at home, and you might be feeling bound by what someone else has done to you. It's very easy in a context like this to play the comparison game. Do not play the comparison game. I encourage you. Test your own heart. Is there a grievance that I'm holding against someone? It doesn't have to rank in addition to the grievous action that has occurred to the people beside us, right? It's just like, what right now am I being trapped by because of what somebody else did to me? I think it was John Hugan who says it often. Forgiveness is our superpower. Is that true? I'm crediting it to you. It's true. As Christians, like if we are choosing to trust God, then forgiveness is our superpower. It is our mandate. And yet I know from my own experience and from the stories that I share in, and no doubt the stories that you share in with others, that forgiveness is really hard. It's really, really hard. And yet that isn't an excuse to do nothing. Because when we choose to do nothing, we remain bound. We remain captive to what others have done to us. There's always a danger that we don't seek to forgive because we feel like the bar is too high. And so I want to encourage you to consider, what are you putting on today? There might be a situation where you're like, okay, I know this is a person I need to forgive or forgive again. And maybe the thing that God is prompting in you is just, hey, what is it that I need to put on in order to forgive today, in order to not be bound today? And you might be here and you might not put your trust in Jesus yet. I encourage you to try this. Just try it anyway. See how God transforms your life by putting his truth into practice. Because God made us to live in relationship with each other. And while brokenness has crept in, while brokenness is expressed from us and around us, ultimately, he desires that we be free. And so I'm just going to let us sit for a moment, maybe just for 1 minute. And because all of these virtues, again, it's not just like, I just need to be more kind, but they are still a decision. I want to invite you maybe just to, in your own minute, just pray under your breath. God, by your Spirit, clothe me in whichever one you need. God, by your Spirit, clothe me in one of these. Let's take a minute now. Jesus, we ask, God, that you would hear our prayers, both spoken and thought. Hear them as offerings to you and an invitation to invite you to do the work that you need to do in our hearts in order for us to be free. We thank you that we forgive because you forgave us first. And our forgiveness is not going to be as perfect as your forgiveness. But God, help us to live in your truth, to live in your perfect justice, and to not be bound by what has been spoken over us, what has been done to us, but rather, God, live in the freedom you created us for. And for those who are listening today, who are simply saying forgiving or forgiving again is too hard, I want to pray that you would give them courage. courage to put on a layer that maybe feels so foreign and feels so different and yet is so necessary in order for breakthrough to occur. Thank you that you're a good God and that you are for us, that you love us, that you meet us in the midst of our pain and brokenness and usher us toward a future that you intend. We pray this in your name. Amen.